She is also a board member of the nonprofit Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund. She lives in St. Paul, Oregon, and is the proud mother of a United States Marine, and works on the farm with her husband, Mark, a teacher, and her 2 daughters. So we're getting raw milk from a different perspective, and please join me in welcoming Charlotte.
I'm all mic'd up. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. I'm so pleased to be here. I really appreciate this opportunity. So my story is, you've probably heard the term raw milk is love, and my story really is a love story about raw milk over the last 10 years. And if you ever come to our farm, you will see that in our family, in our kids, our animals, and every single customer that comes to the store. As a matter of fact, there's a book I want to write called Raw Milk, A Love Story. So I have the title. I don't know what's going to go in it, but that's really what it's about for me and has been for the last 10 years. So let me make sure I got the technology figured out here. I couldn't figure something out, so I had to call my 22-year-old daughter who's at home in Oregon to help me figure it out. But anyway, I'm Charlotte Smith. I own Shampooey Creamery. We started out as a raw milk dairy 6 years ago, is why it's called Shampooey Creamery, but since then we have expanded to the point where now we are a small diversified farm. So we have grass-fed beef, pastured pork. We sell about 30 beef cows. We get them as weanlings, so we have 30 beef cows we rotate. We sell about 40 or 50 hogs off of our farm. We do about 100 gallons of raw milk per week. And we also sell chicken eggs, and we do several hundred chickens a year and Thanksgiving turkeys, who are almost done. So for the year, we do 1 batch of those. We have a big pickup party Saturday before Thanksgiving so everyone can have them fresh. So it's just, I'd like to tell people that I put people who are struggling with their health or their kids' health in touch with the food that heals them. And that's really how I started, because 10 years ago, my 2 older kids, who are 22 and 19 now, had really severe eczema. It was just the oddest thing. They both developed it when they turned 6 years old. And 10 years ago, my daughter had had it for 6 years, and my son had had it for 3 years. And it was very severe. And if you're a parent of children, or especially a mother of children, you know you will do anything to help them heal from whatever it is that's bothering them. I would have done anything. And in that 6 years' time, people recommended all sorts of creams and potions and minerals and vitamins and herbs and teas and concoctions. And I would try every single one of those, and nothing ever worked. And because I was desperate to help my children. And the only thing that helped them was the steroid cream that the doctor prescribed. He said, only use it when you absolutely need it to relieve the itching. That was the only thing that helped. But then one day I was talking with a friend who said that there was an MD in California who was Dr. Tom Cowan. I'd never heard of him. And he said they'd been to a talk by this guy who said people were using raw milk to cure their kids' eczema, allergies, and asthma. And once again, I was desperate. I would have done anything. So I'd never heard of raw milk. We drank skim milk. Didn't know what that was. We have this weird law in Oregon where you can sell raw milk if you have 3 cows or fewer on your farm. So it's really a small amount to make any sort of a living at it, so there just aren't very many dairies. It was very underground 10 years ago. I had to go to this house in town and sneak in their garage and get the milk, and I couldn't tell anyone. If they gave me this whole lecture that if I was ever asked where I got it, I couldn't tell. Since then, they've been given a cease and desist, and they're no longer there, but we have more legal means. We've been able to find it since then. So that's how we started, and I brought home this raw milk. Again, never heard of it, but I thought, what the heck? So we started drinking it, and probably a glass a day. And about 2 weeks after we started drinking it, my son came up to me and showed me that for the 3 years previous to this, the backs of his hands were constantly bloody and scabby from itching them. 2 weeks after drinking raw milk, he comes out and the backs of his hands are smooth and completely healed. And to me, this was a miracle. It was just unbelievable that this raw milk could have done this. And that's the only thing we changed in our life at that point. So I'm one of those people that if a little is good, a lot is great. So we started drinking 2 and 3 cups a day. And my daughter's eczema went away. She had it longer for 6 years. It was more severe. It was all over her face and her eyelids and right up to her eyeballs. It took about 6 months for hers to go away completely, but it did. So then we drank raw milk that first year. After a year, I hadn't even thought about it, but I looked back over the year and I realized that up until this time, I was used to my kids getting colds in the winter and at least 1 round of antibiotics every winter, maybe 2. And that was actually pretty good because I had friends whose kids were getting 5 and 6 and 7 rounds of antibiotics through the winter because their kids are in public school and that's where all the germs were. Well, when I looked over that first year, no one in our family had been sick. They didn't even have a cold. And I had always had seasonal allergies to where I took over-the-counter medication for about 6 months of the year because we lived in the middle of pollen fields, and I didn't need any allergy medication that first year. So then fast forward to 10 years later, and none of my children, no one in our family has had antibiotics for 10 years. We don't get sick. My 8-year-old, who was born during the time I drank raw milk and breastfed, and she's drank raw milk ever since she could hold a sippy cup, she's never had antibiotics. She never gets sick. She has what I have read to be called complete immunity in my mind. And she's in public school for the last 4 years with kids that are getting strep throat and, again, some of them 7, 8 rounds of antibiotics for infectious diseases, and she never gets sick. So how did we become a dairy? Well, in that first few years, about 3 years of drinking raw milk, we lost our raw milk source a couple times. And as you know, if you're a mother of small children and you find this, what I thought was this magical cure for their health and for all of us, you would do anything to be able to have that. And we couldn't live without it. So when we would lose our source, the farmer would go out of business for whatever reason, because it's very hard to operate a 1 or 2 or 3 cow dairy. We'd get on a waiting list for a new place. I'd have to go underground because at that time we couldn't advertise. So we'd find a place, get on a waiting list, and then maybe a year or 2 later, that dairy went out of business. So then I got this wild hair that I could have my own raw milk dairy, and then we'd never run out of raw milk. We'd have an endless supply. So I spent about a year researching it and building our barn in a way so I could milk just a couple cows. I visited about 6 dairies of all, 1 cow dairies and 10 cow dairies and 300 cow dairies to figure out everything I needed to know. I read every book I could. And before I ever brought my first cow home. And then at that time I had this toddler and I was in a mom's group, and so the moms where we'd meet once a week with our kids and we'd visit, they heard my story of our kids healing from eczema. And they're holding babies that have eczema and babies that are on acid reflux medication. So they hear my story and they can't believe it. So here they are all championing me every week, like, where are you at? When's your cow coming? And so it was February, about 6 years ago, that I brought my first cow home, and we were sold out on milk right away. And it was mostly the moms from the play group, and then they started telling their friends. So right away, after about a month, I brought the second cow home, and we were sold out on that cow's milk and had a wait list. And here we are 6 years later. We're maxed out by Oregon law. We have 3 cows. We produce and sell about 100 gallons a week. And we have a few times a year where we can take on a new customer if we have a calf or if someone moves away or something. But otherwise, we operate with a wait list most of the year. So let's see. Sorry, I'm not used to using the computer when I'm talking here. So then I have now spent the last 10 years researching what happened. And oh, by the way, when I found that raw milk 10 years ago, she said, you've got to have this cookbook, and it was Nourishing Traditions. And I took that home and I started reading that, and it was just very intuitive. And up until that point, I fed we all ate boneless, skinless chicken breast and broccoli with nothing on it and skim milk. And I thought I was feeding my family a healthy diet. So that was when my son healed from from eczema with raw milk within 2 weeks. That was my first introduction to food as medicine. I had never heard that concept before. I didn't know what that meant up until then, and it was just like, wow, what I eat today affects me today. I always thought we had to eat healthy now so that when we're 80, we feel better. But I did not realize that what you eat today can change or make or break your health today. So it was just a real shock, and it's just been wonderful the last 10 years learning all these great, wonderful things. So what I did find out is, in all that research, of course, most of us here probably know that raw milk is real milk. My kids were nutritionally depleted. You know, the very act of processed foods means that you take all the enzymes out of foods so that they last forever on the shelf. That's what processed foods is, and that's what I was feeding my family, because I thought granola bars and pasta and healthy breakfast cereals were where it was at. So my children were getting absolutely no enzymes, none of us were, and no probiotics. So they just did not have the immune system strength to fight off something like eczema. I mean, we aren't supposed to have eczema. Our babies aren't supposed to have acid reflux. But with women and families and everybody eating the way they are today, it's just all too common. So the other thing about starting my own raw milk dairy is, when I was looking for raw milk, in my reading and my research, I found that raw milk from pastured cows, grass-fed cows, was the best milk. And I wanted the best for my kids because, we had all these amazing health recovery stories here, and I wanted to keep that up. Well, I could not find the quality of milk I wanted, and some of it went sour early. And you have to understand that Oregon is an unregulated state. So we have this law, 3 cows or fewer, and your raw milk is completely unregulated. So the quality varies. And I knew that I had grass. We live in the Willamette Valley, which is just one of the grass capitals of the world. We have a lot of grass year-round. And so it was really important to me that we practice intense rotational grazing. Our dairy cows are on fresh grass every 12 hours. Every time they're milked, they're moved to fresh grass, and they don't come back to that paddock for 4 or 5 or 6 weeks, depending on the time of year. And we move the rest of our animals to fresh grass as well. Usually every day on the rest of the animals. The dairy cows are the ones we move every 2 days or every 12 hours, and that's one of our safety precautions we take too. So then what I found is we have just recently moved into a much larger farm store. So what I started finding out is people heard our story, and they would hear, hey, my friend told me your kids got over eczema. I want some raw milk too. So what started happening over the years is people would come to us after doctors had told them they could no longer help them. So I have people that walk through the door that have had, for instance, a CEO of a big corporation in Portland had acid reflux for 20 years, and she had so much scar tissue. She had scars on the outside of her throat. She had scars from surgery to remove the scar tissue, and she was taking several medications for this. And she started I taught her how to make kefir, because we can't sell that in Oregon. We can only sell raw milk. She started using our milk to make kefir, and within 2 weeks she was off her medications, and about 4 years later she has no more acid reflux. And this is just one of hundreds and hundreds of stories that I get to hear every day. So what I found is these people, they come to our farm store and they hear our story, and they hear our other customers' stories that may have recovered from an illness similar to them. And it's not uncommon to have someone crying in our farm store. I mean, at least once a week, crying because they are just blown away that they can have relief from something that they have lived with for 20 years. So I have another customer, Karen and Virgil. And Karen had throat cancer, and they're in their early 60s, and the chemo destroyed her salivary glands and her taste buds. So by the time I met Karen, she was 80 pounds. They had just taken her feeding tube out. And if you have no salivary glands, when you eat food, it's like cardboard. You can't moisten it. And she has no taste buds, so it didn't taste like anything. So she didn't want to eat. So her husband called me, and we were both crying on the phone by the end of the conversation because it was so moving. And I had a wait list, and I said, no, you've got to, don't worry about the wait list. You need to come out here right now. Because his dentist had given him my raw milk and said, you've got to try this. Your wife can't eat, she won't eat, try this milk. And she loved it. So he came out that same day, and this was 3 or 4 years ago, and his wife was in the car. She doesn't remember meeting me because she was just in a fog and probably near death because doctors told him at least 100 times through the process that she wouldn't make it. And so here she is 3 years later. She weighs 120 pounds. She's a petite person anyway, so she's gained 40 pounds. She lives off of our raw milk. And when they come get their milk every week, she jumps out of the car and she runs around the farm and she goes and visits the baby cow. And it's just the most amazing story. And he is my biggest proponent. He is out in the world talking raw milk wherever he goes, and he's a tax accountant. And he's a really cool guy too. He's pretty well-to-do, and every time he's at the farm, he'll say, do you need anything? Do you need a new cow? I'm going to write you a check. You just tell me. Do you need $4,000 for a new cow? Here it is. And, you know, I'm too prideful to take any money from him, so I would never do that. But he's like, you cannot go out of business because my wife needs you to live. And, yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah. So this is what we've become. We've become this little hub of, we're open 4 hours a day in our store, and when we're open, people come in and they know that the other people they're looking at in the store shopping for their food usually are suffering or have suffered. You know, we all have some suffering in the past. Well, they know it, and they get to talking about it. And it's just the most amazing thing to witness. And this is where my stories I want to get in a book. Because legally I'm not supposed to say that, you know, that raw milk healed them because we sell raw milk, but I do it anyway. So, anyway, let me try to advance this. Okay, so we've heard so many statistics today, but basically, you know, we know all this. Raw milk improves asthma, allergies, autoimmune disorders, digestive disorders, osteoporosis. And I just want to say that mothers of children who are suffering or husbands of wives who are dying, they aren't going to read the scientific reports. What they do is they get on the internet, they see our story, and they're like, oh my gosh, on her farm she had 3 people that healed from things just like me. You know, that their anecdotes is their science. So it's crazy that they come out there. I mean, they put such immense trust in their raw milk farmers, because it's not just me. It's you have equally as many stories as I do, if not more. They put so much trust in us that we are producing this food that to them is a miracle in the same way it was a miracle to me 10 years ago. And so it's just an incredible world that I get to be a part of. Another woman came to us about 3 years ago because her son is on the autism spectrum, and she was seeing a counselor for behavior, and he suggested raw milk. So she came out, and I told her about kefir, because if raw milk is great, kefir is even better. And she started making her 9-year-old son eat kefir, which those of you who eat kefir, it's an acquired taste. She didn't think it was fair to just make him eat it. So she drank it too, even though she wasn't too keen on it then. Well, what she didn't tell me until later was she had ulcerative colitis. And for 20 years, she was on 13 medications a day. And she wrote me about a year later and said, 2 months after I started drinking raw milk, and now here it is 3 years later, she takes 1 medication a day. She looks great, which she didn't look great before. And if any of you know about ulcerative colitis, it's just a horrible disease to live with. She has her life back, and she has her marriage back. I mean, they were suffering in so many ways that I didn't even know. So we now have so many people, again, that come to our farm and hear her story, and we've got many, many customers that have overcome colitis and Crohn's disease and irritable bowel and it's just endless the number of diseases that raw milk has helped with our customers. There we go. So then what I realized several years ago, and the whole reason I met Mark is there was an E. coli outbreak in Oregon, about 15 minutes drive from my farm in 2012. And it was really, they were terribly negligent. I mean, they knew that it was so much contamination. They had to know that, there's not supposed to be this much muck in your milk. And part of that is because we're in an area where raw milk is unregulated. So I'd read about the Raw Milk Institute, that here's this guy, he's trying to start this institute where he brought some standards to raw milk dairies. And I called Mark up and I said, hey, we need this in Oregon. I don't know where you're at on developing those standards, but we need you in Oregon. And I think he flew up in his plane about a month later, and I'm in touch with about 150 or 175 raw milk dairies in Oregon, just like me. I invited them all, and we had 52 raw milk producers at our house, and Mark came in and taught all of us how to be safer, and things to watch out for. And what I realized is there are absolutely no resources for raw milk producers. Most of the big dairies come from dairy families. No one just goes out and buys 1,000 cows and starts a pasteurized milk dairy. They're dairy family, and they're handed down. Well, raw milk is so newly popular, and the rules vary, that it's not dairy people getting into producing raw milk. It's farmers that already do something else, or they're people who've always had a dream of owning 5 acres, so they sell their place in the city, they move out, they bring home a cow. They see me selling my milk for it, and they think, oh, we're going to get rich, we're going to sell raw milk. And so we end up we had a climate several years ago of a lot of raw milk producers scrambling to try to figure out how to make sure they didn't make anyone sick, because there's absolutely nowhere for them to go for help. So I started a website, and it's called rawmilkpro.com. And now I'm in touch with raw milk producers all over the world. I have people from Sri Lanka and India and Mexico and Australia and New Zealand and all over Europe, but they email all the time. So it's not just Oregon that doesn't have the resources for these small dairies, it's around the world. So anything that we're learning here today, it's a huge resource for these people, and the more we can get it out there, the better. So what happens in an unregulated state like ours, or in many parts of the world, the consumer has to do their homework and making sure that they get milk from a person who's aware. Most people don't intend to produce poor quality raw milk. They just don't know. So I have on my website, I have a whole list of questions that if someone can't get milk from me, I say take these 20 questions and go to the farmer you want to buy from and ask them those hard questions. And most of them are intimidated. Well, they should know what they're doing. Who am I to question the farmer? And I tell them, you need to be confident and question the farmer, because you're feeding your little babies and you're feeding your family. So I try to educate the public too, that in unregulated places, they need to do their homework and make sure it's raised in a way that they want to feed their family. So I've always loved this quote: the doctor of the future will give no medicine, rather interest his patients in the care of the human frame through lifestyle, diet, cause and prevention of disease. So when I first ran across this quote 10 years ago, I thought, oh, that'll be really cool someday. Well, the neat thing is I'm seeing this now. A lot of our customers, several of our customers are MDs, surgeons, internists, pediatricians, anesthesiologists. I have a whole group of nurses from a hospital. I have different midwife centers who send their patients or their new patients to us. We have hospital nutritionists as customers, and it's just wonderful that they're finally recognizing that it's very interesting because they are using the raw milk for their own health, and they say, wow, it's just really too bad I can't promote this in the hospital where I work, you know. So I see it shifting. I see it shifting to the point where the doctors are going to get them to, you know, advise them to change their nutrition, because the doctors, at least where we live, are really getting involved and really believe it and see the changes. Our dentist, our customer who is a dentist, he came to us because several of his patients were our customers, and he saw their teeth, and he said, I think there's something to this. So he gets our raw milk too. So it's come a long way in 10 years, and I think the whole landscape, I'm just so excited for how different it will look 10 years from now. It's just really amazing. So let me grab some water first. I love to inform people why do we pasteurize, and the reason I do this is I have customers, new customers who walk in our farm regularly, and they say, well, I want to try raw milk. I read some on your website. My friends drink it, but the government tells me it's going to make me sick. So if the government tells me that, why are you saying it's safe? You know, why are you going against what they say? And also the fact that they've heard that, oh, we aren't, humans are not supposed to drink milk after we've been weaned. So I share with my customers regularly that the earliest human vessels contained residues of milk. So we've been drinking milk for thousands of years. And like Sally talked about earlier, and Mark mentioned, it's an 18th century solution for an 18th century problem. The death rate was 50% for children under 5 years old, and when they started pasteurizing milk, that dropped. So yes, they needed that then, but we have the technology today to show that our raw milk is safe today, right now as it is. We don't need that anymore. But as Americans, it's like we're on this huge ship in the ocean believing one thing, and it's really hard, and it's going to take a lot of years to turn that ship, but we're on our way. So, you know, again, I hope in the next 10 to 20 years we'll be in a place where at least there's as much raw milk as pasteurized milk available in the stores, or maybe it will be all raw milk. All right, so we have this prevailing paradigm. Again, I see it every day on our farm when people first come to us, and that is that germs cause illness, and germs on the outside, and especially if you have kids in school right now. My youngest is still in grade school, and there are hand sterilizers everywhere. And we do one school field trip a year because we get calls all the time. Schools want to come out to a field trip to our farm. We're way too busy, but the one I do every year is whichever class my daughter is in. So it's really funny when their class comes out to the farm, and these teachers and the volunteers, well, the kids have an amazing time, but they're so worried about dirt at first, and they're like, oh, wash the hands, and pretty soon, you know, we get to the point where, no, it's okay. It is just amazing when I get out into the real world of, you know, schools and out in the malls and everywhere, that how obsessed we are with trying to stay clean. And, you know, I come in from milking the cows, and you talk about how some of us on chicken farms and all are exposed and, you know, have a higher resistance to Campylobacter. Well, I will see manure splattered across my face and eyes, and I'm sure some of it went, you know, in there. So, yeah, it's just... if we build our immune systems and strengthen them, we can fight off any of that, you know, any of those things. So other people are not making us sick. And I hear this all the time. People will be sick again on several rounds of antibiotics and mention that, you know, someone in their office is sick. So we've got a long ways to go with the rest of the world in turning that ship around and how they look at fighting off disease and building our immune system. But it is happening. So it's fascinating to me that Louis Pasteur, we know, is what pasteurization is named after. He had a colleague at the same time called Claude Bernard. They were both in France. And Claude Bernard had the very opposite view of Louis Pasteur. Louis Pasteur believed that germs could make us sick, and we needed to live in this little bubble of cleanliness to keep germs on the outside. Claude Bernard believed very much that you could have complete immunity and that you had to strengthen your immune system. So, but why did we start pasteurization? And the reason was, Louis Pasteur was an outgoing person. He was a mover and a shaker. He hung out with news journalists and medical doctors. And it all came down to he could talk about this. He was a great marketer, and it really did come down to marketing. His ideas prevailed, and nobody heard Claude Bernard, who was an introvert and just kept to himself doing his research. But now it's interesting, we're shifting back to that. So really, I think it was just, luck of personality and marketing that we ended up doing pasteurization in the first place, and it's wonderful that we are realizing that he was wrong and what Claude Bernard was practicing is actually how it should have been. So there has been an explosion of knowledge over the last 30 years, especially about the immune system. Exactly everything I've learned over the last 10 years in my research, that a strong immune system is what protects us from infectious disease. And the enzymes, like I said earlier, enzymes make life possible. Every chemical reaction in our body happens because of enzymes. And I talk to so many people who are getting no enzymes through diet whatsoever. So it's no wonder that we are getting sicker faster than generationally. I have friends my age who are sick with cancer and dying. I mean, dead and dying, and it's just, it's outrageous. It's unbelievable to me almost. But like I said, the lack of, destroying all enzymes in food is what processing is about. So just bringing just a little bit of enzymes and probiotics in with raw milk or kefir or some yogurt is just the easiest thing you can do. And the health recovery stories we have on our farm, which are now in the hundreds over 6 years, many of them, all they have done is added raw milk into their diet and a glass of raw milk a day. That's it. Not gallons and gallons. Just a glass of raw milk a day can make so much difference. One thing I wanted to mention with the health recovery stories is nobody walks in our farm store and says, I'm anemic, I need raw milk. They don't say that, but anemia has been a secondary problem to many of our customers who come to us because they're sick. And then when they start to heal, they'll say, you know what, my Crohn's disease went away, and I was severely anemic for the last 5 years, and even though I take all these iron supplements, I was still anemic. I started drinking your milk, and within a month, I'm no longer anemic. And so what's interesting is here I'll move ahead to, the lactoferrin, one of the principal enzymes in raw milk, helps them absorb all the iron from all the other foods they were eating that they were not able to absorb before then. So it just makes their diet them more able to absorb what they needed to absorb. And many of them, several of them, I always encourage them to go back to their doctors and say, because the doctor will be shocked that they know all of a sudden that after 5 years they no longer need their iron supplements. And they will tell the doctor, well, here's some research my raw milk farmer told me to give you. And most doctors don't pay attention to it. But word is getting out. When we see these recoveries that are so almost instant and in our minds miraculous, it just goes without saying that there's something going on here. So as we've talked too up until now, the lactoperoxidase destroys bad bacteria. You've got the lipase and the amylase help you digest your foods, your fats, your starches. The phosphatase, that's the check for complete pasteurization because phosphatase is destroyed at the highest temperatures. So enzymes are destroyed starting at 118 degrees and completely destroyed at 160 degrees. So when there's a lack of phosphatase in the milk, then they know it is completely pasteurized. Pasteurization destroys all these things and more, the beneficial bacteria, enzymes, minerals, lipase, vitamins, denatures all the proteins. So probably the bulk of our customers come in saying, I'm lactose intolerant, I can't drink milk, but I heard it's good for me. What do I do? And I tell them just what we heard earlier. I think it's about 98 or 99% of people who say they're lactose intolerant can digest raw milk and raw milk dairy products just fine. I think in the 6 years I've been selling raw milk, I've probably had one person say, you know, I just can't tolerate the raw milk either. And that was most likely if they did some gut health improvement and worked on their gut, they would be able to tolerate raw milk just fine. So in the thousands of people who've now drank our milk, I don't know that we have anybody who cannot tolerate it. So as we've heard before, I won't go into the studies, but so much scientific research shows that raw milk protects kids from allergies and asthma. And like I said, the mothers are not reading these studies. They are talking to the people in their play groups and in the schools and in our farm store. And I have hundreds of anecdotal stories of people recovering from you name any disease, and that is the mother's evidence. I mean, they will take it and they'll grab that raw milk and run. That's all they need. So the preventative factors in raw milk, the vitamin K2, protects against inflammation, crucial to reproductive health, nervous system health, like we talked. And then the conjugated linoleic acid helps prevent cancer. And these things are found in grass-fed milk. So it's really important to find cows that are on grass and not fed lots of grain. We feed an amount of grain that based on my research, is equivalent to what they would find if they were grazing in nature on grass that was fully grown. We graze our cows across our grass before it goes to seed, and then they get about 1% of their body weight in grain, GMO-free grains every day. And that's also because they're dairy cows, and they have higher nutritional requirements than a beef cow. Our Angus cows are 100% grass-fed, grass-finished. They don't need grain, and they get really big and beefy on that. Where we are, if you don't feed a traditional dairy cow like ours are Jerseys and brown Swiss, some amount of grain, you'll have problems with infertility and they will lose body condition. So once you start feeding lots of grains, though, it affects these preventative factors in raw milk. So it's really important that you find milk from cows that are eating mostly grass. Ours are supplemented with hay only in the winter when our grass stops growing for about December and January. And then very little grain. So another story I'll bring up here is one of our medical doctors, so we often have people who come to us and they are suffering from osteoporosis, and they start drinking raw milk, and they will go to the doctor and their numbers will improve. And I have people that email me their doctor's tests after their appointments all the time saying, yay, look, it's improved. And so then one of my medical doctors that gets milk from us, and he said, it would be great if we had a study showing what you've just seen here with your customer, that their osteoporosis numbers improve once they start drinking raw milk. But the leading researcher of osteoporosis at Oregon Health Sciences University, his salary is paid by Fosamax. So he said he would lose his job if he ever said that anything but Fosamax cured osteoporosis. So he said, no way in hell are we ever going to get this from an institution like OHSU. So, it's very sad. Probably the number one health recovery story we hear on our farm is from people who turn our raw milk into kefir using a heritage kefir grain. A kefir grain, it's a biological mass of beneficial yeasts and probiotics. It can't be recreated in a lab anywhere, meaning you've got to find someone to get a piece of their kefir grain. And the beautiful thing about kefir that I tell people in our farm store, because I have people who are sad and desperate and upset that they can't get raw milk because it's so limited, is you can take whole milk from the grocery store. I recommend something like a non-homogenized milk that they can find, and you can put a heritage kefir grain into it, and you can make kefir out of, you can transform pasteurized milk into kefir, and you will see these health benefits. So at the very least, if you can't, don't make the best the enemy of good and okay. If you can't get raw milk, you can still turn pasteurized milk into kefir and experience most of these same health benefits. Okay. All right, so I have been just a huge proponent since I started producing raw milk of safe processing techniques and producing safe milk. And this is, it's huge because my family, my children are drinking it. We have adopted babies, newborns who can't nurse, who are drinking our raw milk. So it's important to me to be safe, but also I would lose everything if I had an E. coli outbreak. E. coli outbreak on a raw milk dairy is a lot different than Chipotle, who can just reopen a week later and go on with business. It's handled very differently. We would lose everything. So it's just important to me that we do everything we can to make sure our raw milk is safe, and then other people's too. So things like starting out with vaccinated cows that are free of disease and having them tested before you bring them home to make sure they're healthy. Monthly tests for milk quality. I'm not required to test my milk ever at any point, but we send tests in every month just to make sure that's a really good representation of several parts of our farm, that our cows are healthy and everything there is working fine, that our equipment and our sanitation procedures are up to par, and also just our sanitation in the barn. Are our jars clean that we're pouring the milk into? Is our milk room clean? It's our environment. So it's a great representation of all of that. So we do monthly tests. I have 3 employees who help. We all help milk the cows. They are very highly trained. I get people who call all the time and want to be interns or volunteers, and I say that's fine. You can shovel manure, but nobody milks the cows except people who are very highly trained, and that's part of our hundreds of safety precautions. And so, there are dairies out there who let the interns pick and choose who wants to milk the cow, and unsafe things happen all the time. So that's one of ours, is make sure everyone who handles the cows is very highly trained. These are our test results. Mark had some of those up earlier. I like to show these because we have a ramp plan online on our website, on the Raw Milk or the Raw Milk Institute's website. If you make a plan for your raw milk dairy and you follow that plan twice a day, every day, 365 days a year, you will produce safe raw milk 100% of the time. There is no way anyone will ever get sick on our farm as long as we are following our plan, our farm and anyone else's farm. So it's absurd to think that it's like playing Russian roulette, because if you follow the procedures, you will produce safe raw milk. And now I have 6 years. I just showed you snippets of my test results. I have 6 years of monthly test results of 0 coliforms, 1 coliform, 2 coliforms, 100 standard plate count, very low on all of those. All right, so again, this rawmilkpro.com is where I have, I just break down my milking procedure on this in little short videos, and I have raw milk producers from all over the world looking at those, and then they comment, and then they get into conversations with each other. And I guess it's a shame, but in some ways it's not a shame. There's no resources for raw milk producers anywhere, because we started this, and this is a resource. So it's been really exciting to meet people around the world. I felt like, us here in Oregon, we got this little problem here, but it's not. It's worldwide. So it's a great network of people. I mean, if you're the type of person that's going to commit to milking a cow twice a day, 365 days a year, that's a pretty transparent, honest, hardworking person with we all have the same values, so it's really fun to hang out together. And then, like Sally mentioned, one of the biggest problems with these small dairies is it's very, very expensive to have a raw dairy for many, many reasons. Cows are very expensive. Their feed is expensive. It's hard to get them pregnant if you don't know what they're doing. So then you run out of milk, your cow dries up, and you're feeding a dry, unpregnant cow for 2 years before you can get her pregnant again. So we have this very high turnover rate of raw milk producers pretty much around the world, the ones I'm in touch with. And so 6 years ago when I started producing raw milk in Oregon, not one of those people I met with and mentored with is in business any longer. And pretty much anyone I mean, there's very few people. Christine Anderson has been doing it about 5 years. She's about the only other person I know who's been doing it almost as long as me. The turnover is really high, so what happens is you have all these inexperienced people producing raw milk, and with a high turnover rate, what we need is longevity, so that when they get really good, and so then we don't have 2 years of low bacteria counts, we have 6 years and 10 years of low bacteria counts. So I started 3 Cow Marketing to help other raw milk producers learn how to run their business and market their milk so that they can build trust with their customers and raise their price to a point where it's sustainable so that they will be in business to serve those people that are on my wait list and that are, crying in my farm store because they're desperate for milk and I don't have enough to sell them. So that's kind of where we're at now, is we have our raw milk and I work with other producers. And then lastly, I just want to talk about price because Mark said I would. Do you guys want to hear about raw milk pricing? That was you in the back. It's raw milk produced on the scale that I produce it on, and that, hundreds and hundreds of producers are on 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 cow dairies. It's going to be more expensive. I have kind of in my marketing class, in the course, we go through a worksheet of how to price your raw milk. And it includes things that most of them forget to include, like their mortgage or their rent or their taxes. I'm to a point now where I have to pay workers' comp, and that's thousands and thousands of dollars. All the supplies, the cows, you need to put a cow replacement cost in there because probably half the raw dairy producers I've worked with in the past few years that have gotten started have killed their cow in the first year, whether usually it's around calving or immediately after calving because they're inexperienced. So you've got to have a cost for replacing your cow. Feed, you need to have your a year's worth of expenses saved up. All the different supplies. So you figure out all the costs of your raw milk, and you have to have a wage in there. People will say, oh no, I'll just give my time. Well, you're not going to milk cows for very long if you're not getting compensated fairly, because pretty soon you're going to say, wow, I can make a lot more money back at the office and leave work at 5 o'clock instead of leaving the barn at 8 o'clock at night. So I tell them to figure up all that plus a fair salary and then double it. And they're always in shock, and they're like, double it? I'm like, yeah, because I have seen now, I don't know, dozens and dozens of producers go out of business because they were charging, and it depends on where you are in the United States, they're charging $10 a gallon for their milk, or $10 a gallon, 10 or 12 or maybe 15, and they're too scared to raise their price and take any flack from their customers, so they go out of business. And that I get these calls, I would say twice a month I get a call from another producer, and they're calling me and they're saying, Grandma got sick, or my wife got pregnant, so we have to close the raw milk dairy and I'm going to go get a job. Well, in real life, in everyday life, Grandma gets sick and wives get pregnant every day, and husband doesn't quit his job. And that's because it's far more sustainable. So we've got to make our raw milk dairies sustainable. And if you're buying raw milk from a farmer, give them a check. Offer to pay more. It's devastating to a family like us who needs it their children rely on it, and then they go out of business, and you show up and there's no milk, and they say, sorry, we're out of business. The first time that happened to me, 10 years ago, I was paying $6 a gallon for milk, and I knew nothing about it. I thought that was expensive, but it didn't matter because it healed my kids. And when he went out of business, I said, why didn't you? He just took the cow. By the time I went to get my milk, he said, sorry, the cows are all at the butcher already. I said, why didn't you raise the price? I would have paid $10 a gallon. And he started crying, and he said, I didn't know that. I said, yeah, this is my children. I'd pay anything for this milk. So if you're buying milk from a producer, they are not charging you enough money. And I can tell you that I know that because I think I charge more than anyone I know, and I know the profit margins. So chances are your producer is not charging nearly what I am, so they aren't making money. I have producers call me and they say, you know, I'm really embarrassed. Nobody knows this, but we're on food stamps, and yet we're trying really hard because our customers don't want us to go out of business. And I say, you know, shame on your customers for requiring their farmer to be on food stamps so they can have their cheap raw milk. And a lot of times it's just a perspective shift. You don't realize this, but the costs of operating a really small micro dairy are huge, and they're endless, and it's just a deep bottomless pit of money pit. You know, so pay your raw milk producer more. Tell them, support them in raising their price, because every time I raise my price, I have maybe one family out of 100 who says, oh, we can't do it anymore. Maybe one. So it's not, you know, people walk onto our farm that are stay-at-home moms and one income, and they all have iPhones, and they drive newer cars than I do, and they go to Hawaii once a year. So it comes down to a choice. And they can choose raw milk. We don't have, for instance, we don't have cable, we don't pay for cable TV in our house. So there are people who will complain about our raw milk price, and they pay $150 for their cable and $100 per person for each of the 4 people in their family to have iPhones. Well, there are sacrifices I make because we have chosen to operate a raw milk dairy, and it comes down to a choice. So price doesn't matter because your raw milk farmer is not getting paid enough. So, and it's a choice. But I would say, and on the West Coast, well, in the Northwest, where I am in Oregon, outside of Portland, our cost of living is high. Rents in our area are twice as much as they are just about an hour to an hour and a half away from us. So my raw milk is $24 a gallon, and someone an hour and a half down I-5 can get away with charging $18 a gallon. But I can tell you this, if they're $12 a gallon, if they're $15 a gallon, they are not going to be in business in 2 years. So, because I see this all the time, because I work with so many raw milk producers. So I think that's all I'll say on price. And yeah, that's it. Thank you everyone for staying till the very bitter end.
There's an old saying, you know how to make $1 million in farming? You start with $2 million.
Yeah, or 10 million. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there any move to increase the number of cows you can have in Oregon?
Not at the moment. I've seen the Oregon Department of Ag come a long way in 10 years. So maybe in the next 10. Christine Anderson came a long way by suing the Department of Ag to be able to advertise, and they did that with no fight. I have sat down with the head of the Department of Ag, and I've sat down with the executive director for Oregon Dairy Farmers, and they both said to my face, no way in hell will you ever change this law. So I don't know. I'm to a point where I serve so many people. My personal focus is now back on the farm, and that's someone else's battle.
Yes.
But I hope, and it should not be it needs to be a raw milk dairy person because they have the experience, but we're so taxed. You know, it would be great if we could expand that law, but I don't know that we're at that point yet. And right when I thought the executive director of Oregon Dairy Farmers would start to shift a little bit. He had quadruple bypass surgery and he retired, and we have a new guy in there. So conditions and mindsets change overnight. So right now we have this attitude of you leave us alone and we'll leave you alone and we'll pretend you don't exist. But it would be nice if that would happen.
Because of course you could say double the number of cows, it doesn't double your costs. And that would just help hugely. And I think with the demand,
right.
I actually think that this will need to come from the consumers.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes, and I do think in 10 years how many thousands more people we have drinking raw milk now and aware of raw milk than 10 years ago. So again, I think we'll get to a point where consumer push, we'll have so many consumers more aware, and that's where all this education comes in, educating people.
And I was also interested in your comments about all the doctors who are coming out to you and nurses, and it's just something we should all put out in the universe. Really, every hospital, every institution, every nursing home, every prison, every school, every university should have a dairy farm and be supplying raw milk to the inmates, however they may be. That's a long ways down the path, but it will come. I mean, it's so obvious that this is what we need to do.
Well, the hospital nutritionist who buys milk from us is mounting a campaign to change at least her hospital and get the addition of kefir for post-surgery, post-operative recovery instead of Jell-O. So she's on a mission to do that, and those are the shining stars we need to find that are willing to take that on, because wouldn't that be great?
So I also just want to add, I really feel that everyone who is benefiting from raw milk has an obligation now to take on some mission.
Activism.
Like that. Some activism to get it to everybody else. If you're just drinking for yourself and not doing anything else, it's kind of selfish. And all of these children brought up on raw milk, they are hope for the future. They're going to be the leaders of tomorrow. Mary Enig used to talk about the aristocracy of the healthy. But they also have a responsibility to provide for others what they had the wonderful privilege of growing up on raw milk.
I so agree with you.
Yeah.
So my daughter, who was 12, suffered from eczema for 6 years. She remembers getting raw milk because she was of an age where it's very clear in her memory that she was suffering, and then a few months later, it's gone. So she went on to get her degree in molecular and microbiology, and now is working on her master's in holistic nutrition and building a practice, and 100% of that is due to her experience with raw milk. So she's one of them. I agree.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. It was an excellent presentation. I have a couple questions, if you don't mind answering. One is your capital investment to get going. It sounds like you paid $4,000 per cow, so you've got $12,000 invested in livestock. How much additional capital investment did it require to do your milking machines and your testing lab? That's the first question.
I'll just throw out some numbers. Our milking machine to milk, this is one cow at a time. We milk one cow at a time. Was $2,500. I had to buy a couple tons of hay, $700, $800. We had a barn, but I had to build a milking stanchion, and we live in Oregon. There's a lot of mud in the winter, so I had to build up the area, all the area around my barn, bring in rock and rubber mats because that was one of my safety precautions is I don't want to be milking cows in the mud. So I would say that 7 years ago, when we were building it, I spent about $20,000 cash to build the barn, bring home the first cow that was actually $2,000 back then, and get the equipment and have the jars and the dairy chemicals to clean with and all that. We put a lot more money in over the years. We put in a sanitizer just devoted to our jars. Then you got to buy a refrigerator to house your milk in, carts to carry the milk. But I would say 7 years ago we took $20,000, but it doesn't stop there. It keeps going. The price of the cows has gone up so much because of the price of beef. In the last year, you've probably been reading about that. So, and one thing I learned early on, are you thinking of getting a cow? Okay, so the first cow, I went to the farm and I was very idealistic, and I got a perfect specimen of a Jersey cow, and I paid $2,500 for her 6 years ago. She had great bloodlines. She was very typey, which means she looked like the picture-perfect Jersey cow, and I brought her home. And then by the time I got my second cow, I'd spent my $20,000. I didn't have as much, so I got a $1,000 cow because her jaw was a little crooked, she was ugly and all that. Well, guess what? Their milk was exactly the same. A $2,500 or a $5,000 cow gives the same milk as a cheap, ugly cow. So, I mean, as long as it's disease-free, many people go out and they want, it's like having your first baby. They want the most beautiful cow out there. You don't need that. You need a healthy cow, you need a safe cow, but you don't need the most expensive cows. So that's not how I shop for cows nowadays. So. Okay.
One last question. Thank you. So if you're rotating your cows every 12 hours, moving them from pasture, how much pasture do you need for 3 cows?
Mm-hmm. Great question. That changes. It changes month to month, season to season, year to year, and wherever you are in the world, or wherever your land is too. And I say that because our grass will grow April, May, and June. It will grow. You can see it grow from day to day. So we need far less. I could probably graze 3 cows on 2-3 acres and have more than enough grass. But in August we do irrigate. Very few people irrigate. So if you don't irrigate, then your grass stops growing and you'll need a lot more land. But we do irrigate, but still when it's 90 degrees out, the grass doesn't grow as fast. So at the peak of the hot season, I'm probably using about 6, well, not even that. I'm probably grazing 3 cows on 5 acres. But again, very few people irrigate. So you may need 10 acres and you may need to stockpile some grass so that you can rotate them.
Thank you.
Okay, sure, you're welcome. Yes.
I have my dreams too for the future. How do you deal with this if you need to go away for a couple of weeks? Can you trust your employees, or you just don't go away? You just tie to the farm?
Yes, and in my marketing program, that's a key to sustainability. If you don't plan for that, you will quit just so you can have a weekend away. So the first 6 months I didn't go away, and my kids were playing basketball, and if a game was at 4 o'clock, I would have to decide, okay, I've got to milk the cows after the basketball game. Well, if the game was at 6 o'clock, I'd have to milk the cows early to make it. So my whole life revolved around milking cows. But 6 months in, I realized it's very unsustainable. Are you thinking of getting 1 cow?
I'm just dreaming right now, but I have chickens, and I know how hard it is sometimes to...
Yeah, so a cow has, the chickens, you can kind of put extra feed out so that you can skip it. You can't do that with a cow. You got to be there to milk them. So just train someone. I would never ask someone untrained to milk my cows because you'll end up with mastitis problem or something. But just train someone. Raw milk is in such high demand, you probably in your circle have someone that would train with you in trade for milk.
It would be nice to start communities so we can help each other.
Absolutely. Although that's nice to think about, but if people are not getting something in return, like a lot of milk or money, that doesn't last very long. So you do... my employees are very highly trained. They've all been with me for at least 3 years. Longevity is really important because then they are really skilled. I give them milk, I give them beef, I give them as much as I can because a dairy is a very hard lifestyle. It's very hard on family life. But yeah, just train someone right along with you that you can trust when you leave. And that doesn't mean I've been texting all weekend about the cows too, how much is this, so-and-so has a scrape and, we're still, you never truly leave your cows. You probably know that. But yeah, it's really important to train someone along with you and just compensate them well.
One last comment. I haven't left my cows either. Mm-hmm. I get texted data every 8 hours from our dairy. There's in your heart, you never ever leave.
Yeah.
It's there.
Yeah.
Thank you, Charlotte.
Thank
Excellent.
you, Mark. Thanks.
I just want to talk about starting out with your cows. The one rule you need to know is a dairy farmer will never sell you his best cow.
Yeah, right.
And that was a real problem for us. We would get cows from a farmer going out of business or whatever. We got a few at an auction. And we culled half those cows in the first 2 years. Half of them just didn't make it in our place, in our grass, in our system. The other problem we had is we have about twice as many boys as girls. So it's been very, very slow to build up our herd. And with our experience with buying cows, I said, we're not going to buy any more cows. It's just going to be here. We're going to breed our best cows. So getting to where we want to be is another 5 years away, actually.
Yeah, it's a very slow process.
Now, you didn't talk about the age of a cow, how old a cow can get.
Sure.
But I had a poster board out there.
Oh, yes.
With one of the Swiss cows.
Yep.
At 27 years old, she gave birth to a healthy calf.
Yes.
It's the oldest cow in Switzerland right now.
That's wonderful. That's amazing. Yeah, cows can live a long time. I often get asked that question in Oregon, and it's very interesting because it's very important that raw milk dairies in Oregon, where we're limited to 3 cows, remain sustainable, or we have this constant turnover and we have a lack of raw milk. So what that means for me is I have to have 3 high-producing cows. Otherwise, I won't be in business if I have 3 cows who are each producing 2 or 3 gallons a day. And what tends to happen is after age 12 or so, their production drops. So if you're allowed to have all the cows you want, you can do that. Or if you have all the, big bank account, you can bankroll these cows that are giving less. But if you want to run a business and stay in business, you need to make sure you have 3, and you're limited in the number of cows. They need to be 3 high-producing cows in order to be sustainable. And I just know this because I see, again, dozens of dairies go out of business because they end up with 3 cows who are given 2 gallons apiece, and they don't have the money to invest in higher producing ones. All right. Any more questions?
Thank you, Charlotte.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you. So thank you. Thank you. This concludes our 2016 Raw Milk Symposium. These presentations will be posted on our website for free. We hope that many, many people will watch them, and particularly, as I said before, health officials, regulators, government officials, they need to hear what we're saying. Not just what we, the producers, are saying, but what the consumers are saying. Americans need this milk. Our children need this milk, and I think I need a glass of milk right now. So thank you very much.